After a black man was shot dead by police, officers used tear gas to try to break up the violent demonstrations while people hurled bottles and bricks at police. At least 12 officers hurt, squad cars destroyed, trucks looted, things set on fire. The interstate was shut down, and some in the black community tying it all into a string of deaths of black people at the hands of police. How to heal an America divided. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy. Democratic strategist Julie Roginski. Former National Security Council member under Presidents both Bush and Obama, Jillian Turner. And today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran, Heat Hegseth. He is outnumbered. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
As you heard from what I first opened up the show with, we have a lot of hard news to get to.
Yep.
All right.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it. The city of Charlotte is on edge. City leaders are pleading for calm after violent protests broke out overnight, all tipped off by the shooting of a black man by a black police officer. The family of 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott says he was not armed, but police say he was armed and refused their commands to drop his weapon. What's happening in Charlotte comes on the heels of another controversial police shooting that happened last Friday. In Oklahoma, outrage at the killing of 40-year-old Terrence Crutcher by a female police officer who says she thought he was reaching for his pocket as if he were carrying a weapon and refused to follow her commands. It turns out Crutcher was not armed. Jonathan Steering, live with the news in Charlotte. Jonathan?
Harris, right now I'm standing in the driveway of the apartment complex where the shooting went down. In fact, on the pavement, you can still see the markings showing exactly where the shooting took place. Officers were trying to serve a warrant on an unrelated suspect when they noticed this man, Keith Lamont Scott. The police chief says his officers felt threatened. Listen.
Mr. Scott, as I said, exited his vehicle armed with a handgun as the officers continued to yell at him to drop it. He stepped out, posing a threat to the officers, and Officer Brentley Vinson subsequently fired his weapon, striking the subject.
Now, that shooting sparked a whole series of protests. They began peacefully, but then some protests got out of hand when some of the demonstrators began throwing rocks and bottles at police. At least a dozen officers were injured. Protesters are upset by what they say is a pattern of police using excessive force against black citizens. In the Charlotte case, the police officer identified in this shooting is actually African American, but protesters say that does not mitigate what happened.
You're exactly right. And it don't matter whether black or white, he was in blue.
At one point, the protesters blocked a portion of Interstate 85. Police had to temporarily shut down the interstate, but they managed to clear protesters from the highway well in advance of the morning rush hour. City leaders now are calling for calm dialogue to replace last night's violence. The protesters say they will be back out near City Hall and police headquarters this evening, but they say those demonstrations will be peaceful. Harris?
Jonathan, thank you very much. As we come out to talk about this, Kennedy, I want to start with you. There was a news conference a while ago in Charlotte. I don't know if you caught some of it off the top. Nation of Islam leaders were there, and there was a question that was asked. At least when you looked at black media, is there a divide now in the black community, and what do we do about that? Because this police officer was African American.
Yeah, but that's what brings up one of the most interesting divisions, and you know, it's what we saw the police chief in Dallas talk about. You know, instead of taking to the streets, come to the department, and you know, there are a lot of black cops in this country, and when they are involved in shootings like this, there is a divide, and they are placed in a completely different section. It's no longer, you know, people of the same color in the same community reaching out, trying to do a better job of policing perhaps neighborhoods they grew up in. Now, if you are a cop and you are involved in one of these shootings, to people who are extremely vocal, like some of those people at the press conference, then you are now part of the blue squad.
Right. It's the blue now.
Well, yeah, and it should be. I mean, it shouldn't be about black or white. It is blue, and you got to put yourself in the shoes of that police officer in that moment, that black police officer, that female police officer, where effectively what they have are non-compliant individuals who are suspected for one reason or another, and that's where the black community would say, well, the motive is it's because they're black they're suspected. You can't get inside the head of that police officer. They're in a contentious situation, one where they had a gun, another where a much larger suspect than a female suspect is going toward a vehicle. These police officers make split-second decisions every single day. And to hear community leaders at that conference call for more rioting, for more protesting, for more violence, that's what it was last night. That was lawlessness.
Is that what you heard in what he said today?
Of course. The Nation of Islam leader talked about an economic boycott and then more of the same on the streets. And that Charlotte police officer, who was fantastic this morning, the police officer, when he talked about it, said, we're going to enforce the rule of law. Again, a black leader of that community also, because rule of law matters, and black people deserve it just like white people.
Yeah, you know, this was my criticism with the Colin Kaepernick and the hashtagging and all of that has gone on leading up to these points now. The real issues, Jillian, are not being dealt with. If there are questions about certain police officers and how they deal with things, are we focusing on getting unity together, or are we just hashtagging ourselves?
I mean, that's the key, and I don't want to sound like a Care Bear here, but unity is the key. And what happens in the wake of these kinds of incidents is that the focus is now not on what actually took place, but on looting and on lawlessness in the streets of these small towns, on cars being stolen. I mean, it really, people have to, at a certain point, hear the community leaders stand up and say that violence and looting and going out into the streets is not the answer, and that's going to undermine all of your objectives when it comes to trying to bring about racial inequality if you're the Black Lives Matter movement.
Okay, so the black president that we have right now has waded into some of these issues along the way. What should President Obama do now, Julie?
Well, first of all, he should echo exactly what Jillian said, which is no matter how outraged you may be about this, violence is not the answer, looting is not the answer, violent protest is certainly not the answer. But I have to say, I find it interesting in some quarters that people are more outraged about Colin Kaepernick taking the knee than they are about an unarmed black man being shot in Tulsa.
No, we're outraged about false narratives.
But wait a second. I don't know that this narrative is false. You're suggesting the narrative.
Truth hasn't mattered. The hands weren't up. And those types of things actually should matter, and the narrative takes over.
And in some instances, they were borne out to be right. So the point here is that we need to all wait and see what happens. I do have to say we don't know what happened in Tulsa. Tulsa, to me, is a lot more complicated. It was an unarmed black man. This police officer clearly felt that she wasn't, the female felt that she was in danger. She felt he was reaching for something. It turned out he wasn't reaching for
Julie,
a gun.
Put yourself in your shoes. Hold on. You can't let that go. If this guy's walking, if she's telling him to stop, and this is a big dude, black or white, big dude, walking back to his car, and she's saying stop, and he's walking back and then reaching. No, there's videotape. I've watched it. You've watched it.
I have a quick question about that.
Well, I don't know what she was saying.
Because it seems like, you know, first of all, we have to be able to separate these instances. As rational observers, we have to be able to say that what happened in Tulsa is different than what happened in Charlotte. There were different circumstances. There were different victims. There were different police officers involved. And here in Tulsa, the problem that I have is the bad communication between the officers. Because if one is using lethal force and the other is using a taser or a stun gun, then they're not talking to each other.
Kennedy, you can't get inside the police officers that view different threat
levels. Then they have to get inside each other's heads with better communication.
You can't get inside everyone. It's like every
you actually,
but you can use that to defend.
We have to be able to have that conversation.
People perceive threats differently.
Who is to say that a cop pulls me over and doesn't automatically assume that I'm a threat and then shoots? I mean, you're assuming now that any time a cop says that they shot somebody,
put their lives on the line for us, and we can't relate to it unless you've been there. She doesn't know what he could pull out of that car.
Then any of us can get shot. Any of us can get shot with absolutely no compunction, because what you're suggesting is if the officer goes and says...
to that issue, statistically, more whites are shot and killed by police officers.
If a cop is telling you to stop,
then blacks are.
If a cop's telling you to stop, stop. And if you don't stop and you reach into your window, that's a problem.
That's the cop's assertion.
Well, that's a pretty fair assertion in my mind.
Well, then, okay. think that police officers are trained to communicate with one another if they're using lethal force?
Of course they are. I just think about, as a platoon leader who's been in Iraq and seen guys make difficult decisions, people perceive threats differently. You can't get inside everyone's head in the immediate moment. She pulls a gun, he pulls a taser.
Then no cop is ever guilty.
Put a button on this because you bring this up. We know that we have a lot of members of our military coming back, some of them choosing to serve in different police departments. Perhaps some of that tactical strategy and that information that you're sharing will be something that will be needed in our police departments.
Of course, everybody, we can do
better. Not just to fight terrorism, but to do exactly what Kennedy is doing, and that is to make sure that when you're watching your six, you're also watching your neighbor in front of you and knowing what everybody else is doing. We don't know what happened in these instances.
All right, very good.
Wait for the evidence.
And for the record, I'm always watching your six. This is a Fox News alert. We're getting new information on the man accused of planting bombs around New York and New Jersey. Federal authorities filing terrorism charges against Ahmad Khan Rahami. The criminal complaint says he raged in a journal about what he viewed as American attacks on Muslims. It says he also looked for guidance from people like radical jihadist cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed in a drone strike in Yemen in 2011, and Osama bin Laden. Rahami's arrest also marks 4 attacks carried out since last December by American citizens who spent time in Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Saudi Arabia. Rahami visited Afghanistan and Pakistan several times. The Orlando nightclub shooter went to Saudi Arabia, as did the Philadelphia police attacker and the San Bernardino killer. So obviously, Pete, this is something that all of these terrorists have in common. So what can law enforcement do? What can the FBI do better to figure out the motivations and possible radicalization? What can they do to get to the heart of radicalization before these events take place?
First of all, I think all of these underscore how overwhelmed our intelligence agencies truly are by the volume of information, the volume of travel, and the volume of the threat. Just because someone goes to Saudi Arabia, which could be part of a Hajj or something, and they come back, doesn't mean they're going to be a terrorist. But if you make multiple trips to places like Quetta in Pakistan or Afghanistan, that ought to put you on somebody's radar screen.
I've heard a lot of there.
Well, sure. I mean, if you're from there, but we don't always know exactly where they go once they get there. That's the problem if you're from there. I would say what I've heard from a lot of FBI agents and others and people that I talk to is, listen, it sounds like a talking point, but it's not. Political correctness ties the hands of so many law enforcement officials who feel like they can't raise red flags because they might be accused of being Islamophobic or anti-Muslim.
Well, citizens feel that way too.
Of course, citizens feel the same way. That's what needs to be stripped away if we're at war. Let's
say hypothetically that this terrorist father called the FBI and said, you know, my son is up to no good. He stabbed my other son and he hit my wife.
Yeah, it says that hypothetically the FBI said, if this hypothetical were to be the case. But,
we should tell our audience that all of that is
all of that is not hypothetical. That actually all is
and
true.
It's not funny. Even
right.
Though
we're all laughing because it's not hypothetical. But what makes no sense to me is not that the FBI didn't do their due diligence, investigated, and said that he's not a suspect. But to your point, Pete, we are overwhelmed. There are so many people who travel this way. There are so many people who go back to their homeland. He's from Afghanistan. He was a 7-year-old immigrant who came here from Afghanistan. His father had fought on the side of the Mujahideen, which had trained a lot of terrorists, but in fact was on our side back when the Mujahideen was in existence in the 70s and 80s. And so what do you do with somebody like that? He's an American citizen. There's due process here. What exactly could have been done? Even if you profiled him, what could you have done? It looks like the FBI investigated. They found nothing. And to me, the question is, you're not radicalized until you're radicalized. You're not a terrorist until you commit a terror act.
Well,
this is a legitimate
question.
I would know new information.
Because I just to kind of complete what you're saying, he was radicalized to the point where people were noticing it when he was coming home. So you are radicalized when you are. The question is, when do you take action? So there is a news conference going on right now. The FBI is distributing the following poster. Can we pop it up? I'm hoping we've got it together. They are seeking information on 2 individuals spotted on surveillance camera recordings along one of the streets where that unexploded device was here in Chelsea, the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan. And their advisory now notes that these individuals removed the unexploded pressure cooker device from a piece of luggage, leaving behind the device and taking the luggage with them. It is not immediately clear if these men are believed to be associated with Rahimi. So that is information. We're watching this news conference that's happening right now in New York City. As they start to release some information, we'll bring it to you here live. This is really interesting, Pete.
Well, it sure is. You don't pull a pressure cooker out of a piece of luggage and take the luggage unless you, and not say something. We've got a see something, say something problem within the Muslim community. That's what it comes down to. If people saw those red flags and didn't call the FBI and say, this guy's plotting something, this guy's saying something, that's a problem, and we have to be willing to say that.
Or if they did call the FBI and, you know,
that was 2 years ago, but if we're seeing it in real time, you have to be willing to call that out in real time. If America is your country and your allegiance is
maybe our national security apparatus is overrun because we're spying on too many people and not focusing on the bad guys.
Wow.
Perhaps the net is too wide. And guess what is not wide? The length and width of the time that is making up how many days we are away from the first presidential debate. That is 5 days. And now reports Hillary Clinton is prepping for a tale of two Donalds. That's right, two Donald Trumps. While he's hitting her on her stamina once again, what could we expect Monday night? Plus protests outside the White House. Family members of 9/11 victims calling on President Obama to sign a bill that would let them sue Saudi Arabia for the attacks. He plans to veto it, but should he? And of course, after the show, you can join our live chat. Just click on the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered. I did it. You do it. Or go to facebook.com/outnumberedFNC. And of course, you can tweet us. We will see you there in full force.
The first presidential debate just 5 days away, and Hillary Clinton reportedly lightening her load on the campaign trail to prepare for the race-off against two Donald Trumps. Two! I thought we only knew of one. The Wall Street Journal explaining, quote, Hillary Clinton is preparing for two different foes on Monday's presidential debate as on-message disciplined Donald Trump and a freewheeling and more provocative Donald Trump in mock debates and closed-door sessions that last hours, we're told. Mrs. Clinton and her top advisors are prepping ways to use Mr. Trump's own words against him. Meanwhile, Trump is tweeting Hillary Clinton is taking the day off again. He means yesterday. She needs the rest. Sleep well, Hillary. See you at the debate, end quote. So, in factual fairness, Mrs. Clinton had a bout of pneumonia, her staff said. She was off the trail for several days. She came back. She worked 4 or 5, and now she had taken yesterday off, and you get that tweet. He is furthering that narrative of what?
The unfit narrative, which he hasn't directly targeted
physically,
her health.
Apparently.
Yeah, but when you say unfit, what do you mean? I mean, it's a perfect conflation, actually. You're unfit to be. You could be physically unfit. What are you unfit for? I think he's insinuating that throughout. I do think, though, Hillary Clinton is smart to prepare for two Donald Trumps. We've seen two different Donald Trumps appear at different debates, multiple forms. I just want to know if he's going to use crooked Hillary straight to her face. That's what I want to know. It'll be interesting
Trumps.
to see.
Have we seen as much of the second as we did the former in recent days? Is he more on message, more disciplined?
I think he's far more on message since he hired his new team. And, you know, I think the results in his speeches show that. And we've talked about this on the couch. I think the teleprompter speeches are a little bit more boring, but they seem to be helping him in the polls. She's not doing herself any favors. And, you know, I think it will take her a Herculean feat in order to overcome the health questions that have been buried in people's minds.
Even now.
Yeah, as people sit at home and they wonder, like, maybe something really is wrong with her. And I've heard that conversation from Hillary supporters. I've heard that from Democrats who still plan on voting for her, but the seeds of doubt have been planted.
Yeah. So we've heard from Hillary's own mouth that, you know, Donald Trump, as she describes him, is a man who can be, you know, taunted with a tweet. I'm paraphrasing her now. So does she concentrate so much on the provocative Donald and not enough on what Kennedy said, the one that we've seen most of lately?
Well, let me say right now, 5 days before the debate, Donald Trump will have been declared the winner of this debate on Monday, because all he needs to do is not fall down on his face, and the media will say, look at Donald Trump, he's doing so well.
I think he needs to. Is that because he's not a politician?
It's because the bar for him and the expectations game for him is so low that all he has to do is clear a very low bar.
Should be. He's never done this before.
He's done this about 100 times during the primaries. So,
not the same, though, going up against Hillary Clinton.
Why not? Why is it not the same? He's had a ton of practice during the primaries. He's
because
gone up
none of them won their party's nominee. I mean, she's supposed to be the top of her party.
He's had some pretty good people that he debated, including Chris Christie, including Marco Rubio, and he cleaned up with them.
But look, he's got to prepare for two Hillarys too, I think, right? Look at the response. Look at the response that she gave Saturday in the midst of the Chelsea bombings right here down the street. I remember she spoke to the press on her plane right between the 23rd and the 27th Street. devices going off, and you know, she was her tone was, well, let's wait and see. We don't have any facts. And then the next day, after she had some time to mull it over, she came out guns blazing and she said, for the first time, we're going to get ISIS. We're going to kill them.
She has a plan to get ISIS. Is what
I mean, I
she's
think
going to vet refugees now.
It's not exactly a sure thing what he's going to get.
He's also accusing her of copying him on tone and even some of the visuals as she now puts her Hill Force One behind her. That remains to be seen. I still think that the race has plenty of pendulum swings left in it, and I think the debates are going to be critical.
We'll find out Monday how worried they are, how on the offensive she goes, or whether she keeps playing four corners offense and trying to delay.
Jillian's point is a home run with Doug Schoen, one of our Fox News contributor, who worked in the White House with her husband for 6 years and knows the Clintons very well. He said that switch that you saw and her response to the bombings here in New York was indicative of the fact that she is looking at the message that's first out by Donald Trump and making a shift in his opinion. All right, we'll move on. Be sure to tune in to Hannity tonight. I always do. Sean hosts a town hall with Donald Trump focusing on the Republican nominee's outreach to black voters. Mr. Trump will take questions from the audience, and there will also be some special guests tonight. 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on the FNC. Your night is made. Pop your corn. Many Democrats predicted Donald Trump would be taken down by this point in the election cycle. Now a new poll shows Hillary Clinton is slipping in some key battleground states, as the race tightens. In her campaign strategy, is it working or falling short? Plus, new allegations of pay to play after a report found Clinton gave State Department appointments to nearly 200 political donors. More next.
Welcome back. You are enjoying Outnumbered, and we are enjoying having you. We are awaiting a Hillary Clinton campaign event in Florida, where a new poll show her lead is shrinking. In the crucial battleground state, a new Monmouth University poll shows the Democratic nominee ahead by just 5 points, 46 to 41%. That's down from a 9-point lead. That was just last month. Polls show other swing states tightening as well, raising new questions about Clinton's decision to stick with a traditional playbook. Now, one analyst warns the play it safe strategy didn't work for Trump's GOP rivals, and it isn't working for her. A former aide to Senator Ted Cruz says, quote, everybody in the primary at one point or another tried to take Donald Trump down in the way you take someone down who says absurd things, and none of them worked. She's trying to do more of the same, and more of the same isn't working. All right, Julie Roginski, this is what you do for a living.
It is.
You are a Democratic strategist. If Hillary Clinton called you right now on the Julie Roginski bat phone, how would you answer? What would you say?
I would say, I'm on the air right now. I cannot take your phone call because this discussion is more important than any advice I could give you. And then I would say, keep doing what you're doing because of the reasons that we talked about last week. Campaigns are always about two things. One is about message, and she and Trump are competing in message I think fairly effectively. She's running incredible negative ads against him. He's doing incredibly negative ads, or not even ads, but saying negative things about her. But the other that's so crucial, and it's much less sexy, is organization. And that's where her money advantage and that's where her early organizing advantage really works, in the sense that they have identified their voters, and they know who those voters are, and they have the mechanism to get them to the polls. That's a lot harder to do than people think. And that's something that the Trump campaign, I know that Kellyanne Conway, who's very good, and I've known her for a long time, I think if she had one wish in the world, I'm not speaking for her, it would be to have the money and the resources and to have started earlier organizing in those states.
So the money that he's not spending going to the rubber chicken dinners trying to raise money, and the downtime that he has, and sometimes he'll spend it tweeting or whatever, could very well make the difference for a woman who obviously is struggling right now, A, physically, and B, having to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars in that negative advertising, which he isn't having to pay for because he's constantly on TV, radio, every place he wants to go.
Correct.
He's got a different bully pulpit than she has, and his is free a lot of times because he's figured out the one thing she can't do, and that's own the room over and over and over. So my question for you is, when does she change strategy? Is it right after the debate?
I don't know that she is changing strategy. I would advise her to actually stay a little bit more positive than she has been. She's doing a ton of negative ads against him. They're
but
effective.
Even you say negative works.
Negative definitely works, but I think
I don't know if it works. I think it works to his advantage. I think that's one of the things about this race. And you know, to your point, they're using a tried and true playbook. The Clintons love the 90s. The problem is, I think sometimes with an organization like that, she's been running for president essentially since 2008. Is it becomes too much of a bureaucracy? They're so weighed down that they can't afford board. They don't have the resources to be spontaneous.
But let me just answer that question real quickly. I'm sorry, but to Harris's point, it's not just the message that you're talking about. What I'm talking about is modeling. What I'm talking about is identifying those voters.
On the ground.
Yeah,
on the ground.
Incredibly effective.
Every professional you talk to on the right and the left does point to the data and ground game advantage that Hillary Clinton has, no doubt. But we were just talking about the Vikings.
But is that enough to win? This is such a different election.
I want to bring a football analogy into this because my team is 2-0. Shameless plug to the Minnesota Vikings. But it feels like your team, the Democrats, are ahead right now, but they're putting in a prevent defense. And Donald Trump is picking apart the defense and marching down the field. And you might feel good because you have a small lead, but the anxiety in the back of your head is you're playing on your heels, and if you're going to sit on that old playbook, eventually that pick-apart offense can score a couple touchdowns on you late.
Don't ever use a football analogy on me. I have no idea what you're talking about.
The folks out there know. The folks out there know what I'm talking about.
He's inside the red zone all the time.
Of course, and all he's got to do is punch a few in late.
Goal line.
And I wouldn't want to be the team that's playing prevent defense.
She's a wounded cornerback. He's doing necessarily purposefully, right? He'd like to have the money in the bank, but I love the idea that should he become the president, this sets a great new precedent for kind of a race to the bottom, because once someone can take the presidency for like $500 million rather than $1 billion, whatever the numbers are, I think it's something like that. I mean, who doesn't love that?
They can't, though.
It's hard to recreate Donald Trump.
Julie's sticking to it. There's no way. Hillary Clinton, oh look, there's more, facing new questions of pay to play. Well, Julie won't like this. Over her time at the State Department. A Washington Examiner report finding that 194 of Clinton's donors were named to advisory boards while she was Secretary of State. They gave money to either the Clinton Foundation, her political campaigns, or affiliated groups. Those donors represented, and here's the number you got to watch for, nearly 40% of the total 511 advisory appointments that Clinton gave. But the Examiner does point out such appointments are not illegal or unprecedented. 40%, that number, nearly 40, were given to people who gave to the things that she loved. Does it matter?
Yeah, of course it matters. I think this is just part of the drip, 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 whether it's pay to play or email that will plague Hillary Clinton to the very end. Later on, we're going to tell a story about word association. The word association words that we think of her, our email, our pay to play, our foundation. This only adds to that 40%. Of course, you donate, you get what you want with the Clintons.
All right, so Jillian, you've worked across 2 administrations, and what the Secretary of State does and how she chooses to do it, I would imagine, affects our national security. Talk to me about that component in learning what.
Of course it does, and what I want to say now is that I don't want to be on the side of defending this because I'm not supportive of it. But what I do want to point out is that we're kind of assuming an inverse correlation here, right? What if the people who gave money to the Clinton Foundation actually work on already and believe in the issues that they're promoting? And so when she becomes Secretary of State, it sort of
like
makes
an interior
sense.
designer from Arkansas who all of a sudden ends up on a UN UNESCO board.
Look, you can parse it apart,
I mean,
and that's
I'm
why
sure
I don't
being
like
able to contrast paisley and stripes is critical
again,
for
out of
helping
all
those in need across the globe.
Out of all these people, what we need is really good demographic breakdown on who these people are and what they did, which we don't have right now.
And what their backgrounds were.
Exactly.
But one
Maybe
thing
these
that they
were perfectly
had
qualified
in droves,
people, and then the semblance of impropriety is simply that, a semblance.
Okay, the optics of it. One thing that they had in droves that the others perhaps in that list of 511 did not, Julie, was access to her in the State Department. And that is really the optic, Jillian, that people have been most critical about, because they feel like, well, if you pay, do you get to play more with Hillary?
Yes.
I don't think the awarding of not political posts, excuse me, but ambassadorial posts or other posts tied to fundraising is limited to just Hillary Clinton. I think this was not new. But I will,
just because other people do it.
But I will say, you know, I think it's interesting. You had $258,000 from Donald Trump's charity given to settle his business lawsuits. That's illegal. That is illegal. That's not something that's, well, it doesn't look good. That is a blatant violation of the law.
And has he spoken about that?
Broken. He refuses to address the issue. This was broken in the Washington Post yesterday. And the reality is that is a violation of the law. You have a congresswoman from Florida who just got indicted for the same thing. And the question to me is, That's a violation of the law. What we're talking about here is a practice that none of us may support, but it happens consistently across administrations, and let's not say it's limited.
Can I just say something very quickly to that? I mean, you're absolutely right, and I think, you know, he's just not as skilled of a liar as the Clintons are.
You just won't address it.
And, you know, with this stuff, you guys are right. I mean, it happens with other administrations. It happens in both parties. It happens all the time.
It's not that it happens. That's the way everything works.
Yeah, that is the way everything works, but it doesn't make it okay. But I guess the difference with Donald Trump, I guess the hope was when he started his candidacy, like finally you would have a candidate whose campaign was not bought and paid for by rich people seeking access.
But it's not.
But it is.
That revelation is not that it was bought and paid for seeking access. It's that he's a businessman who's done things
that are illegal.
That businessmen do.
No,
that's how people look at it.
Businessmen do not do that.
No, in the minds of voters. I'm not saying it's okay. In the minds of voters, they look at what Hillary Clinton did and said, more corruption. They look at Donald Trump and say, businessman.
He's not taking money from donors. You're saying now all of a sudden Donald Trump is not taking money from big pocket donors? Of course he is. So let's not pretend. Let's not pretend that he's. Oh, come on. Let's not pretend that the Mercers are not funding, who are huge Republican donors, are not funding his campaign, expecting something in return. In fact, he's already paying for their vendor services. Give me a break.
We're going to move on. Protesters marching outside the White House demanding President Obama sign a bill that would allow families of 9/11 victims to sue Saudi Arabia over the attacks. The White House says that will not happen, and those families are not happy.
The president looks like he's going to veto this bill, and Friday he has to veto, and if he does, he'll show that he's with the Saudis instead of the 9/11 families and the American people.
Welcome back. President Obama and Congress are set for a showdown over the so-called 9/11 bill. Families of 9/11 victims protesting outside the White House yesterday, calling on Mr. Obama to sign the measure. The measure would allow Americans to sue Saudi Arabia for its alleged connection to the September 11th attacks. Saudi Arabia was home to 15 of the 19 hijackers and home to a lot of the Wahhabi form of Islam that has emanated from there as well. Some accuse the Saudi government of supporting them directly or indirectly. Supporters of the bill say it would be a powerful deterrent against terrorism. But President Obama says it could dangerously undermine the United States' interests worldwide. Congress may override his veto, but now some Democrats are reportedly starting to show cracks in support for the measure. Jillian, I've got to go to you on this. There are two powerful sides on this. The White House saying it could undermine us. 9/11 victims, who we all want to side with, saying, hey, the Saudi government had a role. How do you look at this?
The way I look at it is it's a big deal in the Congress right now. Senate's going to stay in session until they get it done. It's because this is so emotional. On the one hand, everybody sides with the victims of 9/11. We all want them to get redress from the Saudis. But the problem with this legislation is the long-term impacts. And President Obama's position, which I happen to agree with in this case, is that this sets a bad precedent. It actually, in the long term, is going to make Americans more vulnerable to foreign lawsuits. And that opens up a can of worms that we can't control.
Unpack that just a little bit more. Americans vulnerable to foreign lawsuits, meaning it's not just about whether Americans can sue. You're saying
it's
other
a two-way
street.
There's going to be reciprocity here. So if we start doing this in foreign countries, the same is going to happen here. And once we start opening up, let's say you served in the military, do you want to be sued for something that happened on the battlefield 10 years ago by an Afghan, a Pakistani? I mean, there's rolling consequences here. Is the problem.
One of the things that our government does to make sure that we don't get into these situations where people are able to sue companies and countries and so on and so forth because of what happens militarily is that when we hit a village, and we know this dating all the way back to Vietnam, there is remuneration that happens right there instantly. We may rebuild, we may compensate families. We know that this happens. You know, you've served.
Yep.
Okay, so that prevents some of that blowback, if you will, legally from those families who may have gotten droned accidentally or whatever might have happened. The problem with this, though, I think that gets really complicated is we were hit in an unprecedented fashion. This isn't like there was some mistake that was made and we can go into a village and try to do a make good, which there never is for life.
But you're absolutely right. And the intent behind that is so clear. And, you know, I look at these families and I look at Saudi Arabia, and I think that we should be so dubious of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And they certainly don't have our best interests in mind. And, you know, what more are we going to put these families through as a country? And to appear like we're not supporting them them. And I do think there's something vastly different between actors on a battlefield and a country, and there are people there who have been shielded from real examination by these administrations and this government for whatever reason, and it is unacceptable.
Who draws that line?
Let me try to actually second what Kennedy said. I think before we talk about any lawsuits, the government needs to be very clear as to what Saudi Arabia's involvement was. We still do not know. It has now been many years. This has been over a decade.
Pages not redacted.
That's my point. That's my point. It is now
classified pages.
It has now been 15 years since this terrorist attack took place. It is time that the government let the American people know exactly what the Saudi involvement is, and then we could talk about a potential lawsuit or not, depending on what the Saudi role was. But the problem for me continues to be that the previous administration and this administration, in a very bipartisan manner, have shielded the very bad behavior of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which exports because they're an ally. But at some point, you have to acknowledge that your ally is exporting more terrorism than your enemy, Iran, or anybody else ever could. The Saudis are on par with the Iranians in exporting terrorism against their interests around the world.
And this administration decided, okay, redacted maybe, but you can't see everything.
Well, but this administration's been a lot tougher on the Saudis than its predecessor. President George W. Bush had a great, which I commend him for, had a great sort of personal relationship. I traveled with him to the kingdom in 2008, and we all saw firsthand with King Abdullah the way they interacted. That was a real sort of partnership we had then. Today, I think President Obama is really chafing under the kind of legacy of that, and he's trying to. He's also
emboldened Iran in the process. Julie, I do like it when I agree with you.
Thank you.
I appreciate your exhortation on Saudi Arabia. Outstanding. Well, we move on to an eye-opening new survey. It finds Americans associate words like email and lie with Hillary Clinton, but words like speech and president with Donald Trump. What these clues reveal about how Americans really view the two candidates. That's next.
More Outnumbered in just a moment. First, let's go to Jenna Lee with what's coming up in the second hour of Happening Now. Hey, Jenna.
Hey there, Harris. The FBI wants to question two men in relation to this weekend's Chelsea terror attack. We should learn more about this case at a news conference just announced at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to have that live, and we'll have the latest. Also, 47 days until the election now. Both campaigns in full swing. As polls are tightening, we're awaiting Donald Trump at an event in Toledo, Ohio this afternoon. We're also awaiting Hillary Clinton. She's been off the trail, as you know, doing debate prep. We're expecting her in Orlando, Florida. We've had some breaking poll numbers, and we're going to talk about which party will also control the U.S. Senate. We don't want to forget about Congress as well.
And they don't want us to forget about them either.
And they never do.
They're persnickety like that. All right, Jenna, thank you.
As the 2016 race heats up, a new Gallup poll finds words like email, lie, health, speech, scandal, and foundation dominate what Americans have heard about Hillary Clinton over the past 2 months. But by contrast, words linked to Donald Trump, like speech, president, immigration, Mexico, convention, campaign, and even Obama, are more varied, based on his campaign activities and his statements. While Clinton has been attacking Trump on character, the poll finds no specific words representing negative traits have stuck to him the way words like scandal and lie have to Clinton.
That's because the conversation about the Clintons has been going on for decades with those same words, so they have stickiness in them.
Yeah, there's been a lot of time for people to, they're not just Googling in the last 2 months. This has been kind of going on and on and on.
Just from what I've seen.
I mean, thankfully, that doesn't apply to the rest of us, right? Because if we all had to die by our Google search terms, I don't know how well we'd be
gangly Harry.
Google Harris thinks I'm 5'8". That's like the best thing that's ever been said about me in my life. I'm like, really? Thanks, Wikipedia. I don't know who wrote that, but I'll take it.
So this is awkward if you're Hillary Clinton, though, because you're spending how much money? Oh, I don't know, north of $50 million on negative ads against Donald Trump. Yet they're like my favorite egg pan, no stick. And yet for her, lots of stick.
You know what's interesting, though, is people I think are actually much more influenced by the things that they seek out on search engines like Google, as opposed to political ads that people have really grown numb to. And so it's interesting because after the 9/11 memorial collapse that she had, if you went online searching for video, she has a digital team that they use something called search engine optimization, SEO for short, a very clever acronym. And basically, it's a way of controlling what people see about you on search engines. And even with that, even with her team doing that and trying to delete and move things way down in search posts, still people are putting things in like health and liar.
Do they offer a subscription service for private citizens?
I think for a few $1 million, you could probably have a couple of your people given immunity from prosecution.
You know what also fascinates me about this? You know, you always hear the qualms about how much time Republican candidates, just in general, not just for president, how much time Republican lawmakers get in the media and the type of press that they get. Hillary Clinton, you could argue, has gotten very positive when you look on whole. I mean, the email scandal has been covered, but not nearly as much as her walk into Chipotle and some of the other images, the double rollout of her campaign, that sort of thing.
In general, she has received overwhelmingly fawning and uncritical coverage.
I disagree.
Yes,
I disagree.
This channel and elsewhere have done a good job
fact-checking. Barack Obama has. Hillary Clinton has not.
Barack Obama got the biggest free pass any
That's what I'm
candidate's
saying.
ever
Yes,
gotten.
Barack Obama. We agree.
I think they're critical of her, but for example, when the press loses patience with her, when they did after the 9/11 fall, because she didn't tell them for 90 minutes, that's when they turned on her.
They lose patience with her from day one. This woman has been more maligned for 25 years than any other politician.
Let's take a poll.
I think she's gotten
horrible press. Take a poll on that.
Right.
Who do you think has gotten the most positive press? I'll be looking at my Twitter.
Overtime.
We'll be right back. Stay close. Thanks to Pete Hegseth for being here, and in my outnumbered Insta poll, more positive press, Trump or Clinton? Right now, Clinton is leading by 64% to 36%.
Oh, shocked. 94.
Whoa. What did you say?
It'd be 94.
Oh, okay. You and Julie will be so much fun at Outnumbered Overtime. FoxNews.com/outnumbered. Click that Overtime tab. Also, Facebook.com/OutnumberedFNC. Now, happening now.